Crescent Chevrolet Geo. Downtown for 60 years.
Friendly Crescent Chevrolet.
It's a real shame. Some companies still sell gasoline without engine cleaning additives. They only put them in their high-octane grades. So you have to pay for octane you may not need just to get the additives you do need. More profit for them, but a waste of your money. At Quick Trip, every grade has all the additives you need. So you don't have to waste money to get the right gasoline for your car. Nobody sells better gasoline than Quick Trip.
This is CNN.
From Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, John Sununu. Tonight, the right stuff? In the Crossfire, in Indianapolis, Republican presidential candidate Pat Buchanan.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. People often ask me, whatever happened to that guy, Pat Buchanan? Pat left Crossfire last November, and since then, he tells us, he's been running for president of the United States. In primary contests so far against George Bush, he's 0 for 19. But he's gearing up for a big push in California June 2nd and promises, quote, a lot of sizzle in the steak. The Republican Party chairman says that if Pat doesn't drop out before California, endorse Mr. Bush, and promise to campaign for him, Pat won't get a chance for a big speech at the party convention this summer. Pat has said he won't work for Bush unless this man, Rich Bond, is fired. What is Buchanan's game? You know he won't be coy with his old friends on Crossfire. Fred Barnes is sitting in for for John Sununu. Fred?
Sounds like you miss Pat. Hey, Pat, let me ask you about this sizzle in the steak. In Pennsylvania, whose primary is next Tuesday, as you know, there are lots of conservative Republicans, yet the latest poll I saw from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette has you at 9%. What gives?
Well, that's where we've been, Fred. We have not gone into any primary state in the beginning. We'll probably do better than 9%. We simply could not do Pennsylvania. It's regrettable. It would have been an excellent state to work. But you don't have time to do them all. The first 14 weeks, we did New Hampshire and Super Tuesday and Georgia and Michigan and Illinois. It's a big country, Fred.
It certainly is. Pat, you've said your campaign, since you're obviously not going to take the presidential nomination from President Bush, is about defining where our nation's going and winning back the party and so on. How can you achieve those if you keep losing primaries by such a large margin?
Well, we've already done it, Fred. As you know, George Bush has admitted he made a terrible mistake in the major economic decision of his presidency, that tax increase. He says he'd never do it again.
Yeah, but he hasn't tried to undo it.
He's fired, no, he has not undone it, but he's fired John Frohnmeyer. He is talking much more conservative. He's put on hold so far, I think, his decision to go to that Rio summit. He came up to Michigan, where I was campaigning against regulations, and lifted some regulations he was about to impose. Fred, every journalist in Washington will tell you that Pat Buchanan has influenced Bush's candidacy, his decisions, his rhetoric, and his actions.
That's right, Pat. You've made him a better candidate, but was that your goal?
Well, there's no doubt that George Bush is a better candidate, and that disproves the argument that Pat Buchanan is somehow hurting the Republican Party by bringing it back to the principles on which it ran to 3 straight landslides. There's no doubt George Bush is a better candidate today than he was that floundering figure in New Hampshire in January and in December. And I think that's good for the party, and I think he's moving back in the direction of sharpening the differences with the liberal Democrats on Capitol Hill. And that's of benefit to the conservative cause and to the party and Mr. Bush. That's
okay,
right.
Well, let's talk about Rich Bond then, the Republican Party chairman. He says you can't speak at the convention unless you get out before California. Do you believe him, or is he bluffing?
I don't think Little Richard, as we fondly call him in the Buchanan campaign, is going to be making that call, Michael. The President of the United States is going to decide whether I speak at that convention and probably when I speak at that convention. I intend to go there and endorse George Bush, and I intend to say why I believe the Republican Party and the Republican ticket, if I'm not on it, should be elected, and why the Democratic ticket should be defeated. In order to do that well, you would really need a prime time slot, I think, Michael. And I think that's what Mr. Bush is going to make the call, though, not the little gentleman up at the committee.
Well, here's the call you have called upon Mr. Bush to make, which is that you said, unless he fires Rich Bond, you won't campaign for him in the fall. Are you going to stand by that, or are you going to wuss out on that one?
Am I going to cravenly crawl away from that?
That's my question, yes. Put in your characteristic style.
What I've said basically is, I think Rich Bond, in terms of what he said about me in Georgia, and I've heard that he has since retracted it, but what he said about me in Georgia not only was, I think, for a party leader, was a slander on me, but it slandered all those people in Georgia. I went from 15% to about 37% in Georgia. And what it said, in effect, was that these Georgians were going to me because they thought I was really a David Duke.
Yes,
now, that was a slander of my people, and I think he owes them an apology. But no doubt about it, Michael, George Bush is entitled to have the chairman he wants. I'm going to endorse the candidate of my party in August. But clearly, how hard you work for a ticket is, how hard you're going to work for the party and the ticket depends on where the whole party stands, where we're going. Are we really headed into the New World Order and all of that? In which case, a lot of the Buchanan people are going to sit on their hands.
Let me ask you about one of the issues you're trying to emphasize in California, which is illegal immigration. I was rereading, as I always keep it close to me, your book from 1988, right from the start, right from the beginning, and I came across this line. It's in the last paragraph. Americans, from the illegal immigrants to the Silicon Valley yuppies, are a vibrant, energetic people capable of working hard and building a prosperity no nation has ever known. Doesn't sound to me like you were opposed to illegal immigration in 1988. Was that something you were wrong about from the beginning?
No, I believe that immigrants add to a country, clearly. They've added to the United States. We are, in the cliche, a nation at least of the children of immigrants. My argument, Michael, in California is there are 1 to 3 million illegals coming across now every single year. They are swamping the social services. The federal judges require, for example, the education of children of immigrants. California has an economic crisis. It is raising taxes repeatedly. Taxpayers are leaving the state. There is an invasion, a peaceful invasion of this country from Mexico.
But you're not denying, Pat, are you, that this is something on which you have changed your mind since the late 80s?
No, listen, I am not a believer in... I do believe that immigrants strengthen a country, no doubt about it.
Illegal immigrants is what you said just in 1988. Illegal immigrants.
Well, look, what I'm saying right now is the burden of the illegal immigration in California is swamping the social services, causing economic and social problems. Some folks coming in there now are bringing drugs, a tiny minority. Many are coming to get on welfare and other social services. I think the President of the United States has got an obligation to stop it. I mean, he's the president. He's supposed to enforce the immigration laws. If we want open borders, as the Wall Street Journal recommends, then okay, have the Congress of the United States legislate open borders.
But I believe you even wrote a column advocating or endorsing the idea of open borders. I will confess I couldn't find it this afternoon. But you come as close to that as you possibly can in that quote I just read.
No, well, listen, there's no doubt, Michael, that if you go out to California and you see the situation and you talk to people out there, there is a serious and growing problem, and I think the immigration laws need to be enforced. Now, if I don't believe I ever said it was ollie in free should be our immigration policy. If I did, I was mistaken. But clearly the illegal immigration should be stopped, and I would stop it if I were nominated and elected, and Mr. Bush ought to. And let me tell you something. Before the California primary is concluded, Mr. Bush will begin speaking to the issue of illegal immigration. Mark my words.
I don't doubt that. Pat, you know, you've done some things in this campaign that I haven't quite understood. But one of them was, I don't understand why you didn't sell your Mercedes. It caused you great problem when the Bush people ran that ad in Michigan. You knew it was going to be a problem months before. You'd been asked about it on television. How come you didn't get rid of the car?
Well, because, I mean, I think that would be a little phony. The truth is that Shelley and I talked over buying the Mercedes, and we went out and bought the Mercedes, and selling it isn't going to reverse that decision, and getting it out of my driveway is not going to do anything to affect the fact that I did buy a foreign German car, not a little Mercedes, but the great big one, the SEL 560.
Yeah, I've seen it,
And you might
Pat.
as well, it's legitimate for George Bush to hit me on that when I'm arguing an America First foreign policy and trade policy, and I will say, look, I will admit maybe I made a mistake and didn't think it through in buying the Mercedes. If George Bush admitted he made a mistake in imposing $165 billion in taxes on the economy and turning it into the dumpster. And I think that's a fair exchange.
So that's as close to an expression of regret?
I'm Mercedes owner.
So that's as close to an expression of regret as we're going to get, huh?
Well, no, I mean, obviously, politically, if you were thinking about running for president in 1989, you would not have bought a Mercedes, no question about it.
Well, Pat, we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to ask you how you plan to win back all your Republican friends that you zinged so mercilessly during the campaign.
Larry King Live is brought to you by Ford and your Ford dealer. Have you driven a Ford lately?
It may surprise you to learn who, over 30 years ago, was the first car maker to build cars with seat belts, to make safety glass standard, the first U.S. car maker to offer anti-lock brakes, and who today offers more models with dual airbags than any other manufacturer. That company is Ford Motor Company.
We're committed to making safety innovation an important part of quality.
Ford Motor Company. Quality is job one. It's working.
I swim, I jog, I love junk food. Sometimes even I get constipation. When it happens to me, I take this little pill. It's X-Lax. Surprised?
Now, only X-Lax pills give you 3 choices. Regular, extra gentle, or new maximum relief with 50% more medicine. Today's X-Lax for regular people who sometimes aren't.
Today, we need to make every drop of oil count. So at BP, we're using advanced drilling techniques. Building oil fields that are smaller, more efficient, more productive than ever. Because that's the kind of thinking it takes to deliver about 10% of America's domestic oil. And to make the most of every drop. BP, the energy to change.
On CNN Today, what price do Russians pay for getting pregnant? Abortion as birth control on World Day. Then popular message, unpopular messenger. David Duke and his future on Trier and Company. All today on CNN.
Welcome back to Crossfire. Our subject and our guest is Pat Buchanan. In his challenge to President Bush, Pat's got 54 delegates to Bush's 963. But who's counting? Pat's vowed to keep his campaign alive through the California primary on June 2nd and even beyond. Pat, I heard an interesting story in Washington the other day about you and your old Reaganite colleague, Bill Bennett, who was the drug czar under George Bush, and has been very critical of your campaign. Of course, Bennett has. Bennett, so the story goes, ran into you at the Gridiron Club dinner in Washington, came up and shook your hand and said that you and Bennett ought to get together and talk, and that you said not now and turned a cold shoulder on him. Is that right?
No, I said we ought to get together after a while, and the reason I said it is because Mr. Bennett accused me of, quote, flirting with fascism. And he did that after I'd done very well in New Hampshire and Georgia, and I thought it was about as nasty a crack as one could expect from someone whom I thought was a friend. That's why I said that.
Well, Pat, you've been calling these neo-conservatives like Bill Bennett names. You refer to them as fleas in a column you wrote.
Listen, Fred, I think you and I know that if you take a look at what was said by Mr. Gingrich and Mr. Bond and Mr. Bennett and the Chief of Staff to the President, right after I did very well in New Hampshire and was doing extremely well in Georgia, I think that those smears and those slanders were calculated. They were part of a program, and they were done to me because I was doing very, very well. There's no doubt in some of my columns I've been tough in general on neoconservatives, but I think that is a matter of an entirely different category when you call somebody you know a fascist. How can you call Pat Buchanan a fascist when A, he believes in smaller government, and B, he wants to bring the troops home from the United States and not engage in other people's foreign wars? So I thought that was a cutting comment and uncalled for, and I think my reaction there was justified. But this race is not between me and Mr. Bennett or the Chief of Staff, whatever his name is. It's between Pat Buchanan and George Bush. But Pat, and there are still cases and points to be made here, Fred, that are serious and have to do with where this country is going. I understand. And not the Beltway nonsense of who said what to whom at the Gridiron dinner.
Wait a minute, Mike. Wait a minute. I want to ask about one other person, and you raised some of these Beltway people in your ad where you attacked Jim Lake and Charlie.
We didn't attack them. We said they were registered agents of Japan, and it was a very light. Well, that's a truthful comment. It was a very light comment. Don't say the president attacked me when he mentioned the Mercedes. He had every right to do that. It's a legitimate point to make.
Well, Pat, Jim Lake, who I talked to in particular, certainly interpreted it as an attack. He regarded himself as a friend of yours, said he donated repeatedly to your sister's political campaign, said he'd gotten jobs for your relatives, and then you do that to him.
Listen,
he took it personally.
it's a valid issue to say that Mr. Bush has too many advisors who are on the payroll of foreign companies and or foreign governments. It's a valid issue. Registered and unregistered agents of influence are dictating in a lot of ways the policy of the government of the United States, and that's a valid issue. And we mentioned that Mr. Lake was one of them. I hold nothing against him personally, but there's no doubt about it, that's valid to recommend. I don't hold anything against George Bush personally, but we went out and said he gave us his word he would not raise taxes, and he did it. And these are valid issues to raise, and they're not in the nature of name-calling.
Straighten out for us, Pat, what exactly you think about Dan Quayle. You've spoken very cuttingly of him. You've called him Little Danny Quayle. You've also said you have nothing against him and he's a good conservative. Do you respect and admire Dan Quayle, or is he this contemptible little figure, Little Danny Quayle?
Well, I mean, Dan Quayle has... I'll say this about Dan Quayle. He's hit me hard, but fairly. I think isolationist, protectionist is a caricature, but it's legitimate political rhetoric. And I've used, I think, rhetoric, Little Dan Quayle and things like that, are within the realm of a fair comment and criticism. I made one cutting comment about Dan Quayle I probably shouldn't have, but it was in response to a question where a reporter said, and it was in the same period that Dan Quayle had said I didn't have the strength or the character to be president, and I found out later that Dan Quayle had never made the comment. I think Dan Quayle has run a tough campaign for his president. It's been fair, and I think he's done a good job as vice president, and I think he's a decent and honorable guy, and I hold nothing against him in his campaign personally at all.
It sounds to me, Pat, like you're trimming your sails. You say you're going to go full strength in California. Are you actually going to go in California the way you were going in New Hampshire? Or are you going to be actually running a sort of a semi-fake campaign, scoring a few rhetorical points, but actually going after the Congress and so on and so forth to preserve your role in the party in the future?
I'll tell you why I'm in California in a single word. It's Hayfork. It's the name of a tiny community up in the Trinity Alps where I went an hour and a half from Redding, and it's a town that is dying because of a decision of a federal judge in Oregon. And an issue you and I all laugh about, the northern spotted owl, is killing one community after another, and I'm staying in this race to bring to the attention of the President and the White House and the Congress just the disasters that are occurring out there because of decisions they make on pieces of paper. They shift back and forth. And this is campaign, Michael, is trying to do a lot of things. Win the nomination, bring the party back, give voice to some of the folks up there in New Hampshire who are voiceless and who have been forgotten and abandoned, and try to get the conservative movement, as well as the Republican Party, back in touch with the people who gave us all those victories.
Are you going to be as nasty and tough against George Bush and Dan Quayle in California as you were in New Hampshire, or are you trimming your sails?
No, I have not said anything personal against the president or Dan Quayle, and I won't, but I'm going to raise the issue, why don't they stop the illegal immigration? Why don't they take care of these folks in Hayfork and get that decision reversed? Why don't they do something about it? They raised taxes, so did Pete Wilson. That's a mistake, and we're going to hit them for it.
Pat, I got to cut you off. You know how these things work. When we come back, I'm going to ask Pat, why is he surprised to discover that a lot of people really hate him out there?
Hello, I'm Susan Rook. At the top of the hour, the FBI may have found a way to avoid a potential class action lawsuit by agents claiming discrimination. Charles Manson goes before the parole board, and fierce fighting in Sarajevo in the deadly tug-of-war over the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Prime News is right after Crossfire.
Ask anyone who's driven a Ford lately. Ask them about quality. One of the reasons 5 of the 10 best-selling cars and trucks in America are Fords. The F-Series pickup, Taurus, Explorer, Escort, and Ranger. 5 out of 10 of the country's best sellers. It's quality that breeds success. Have you driven a Ford lately? It's more than just a question. It's an answer.
What if we could make all the clean air and water we need?
What if we understood the aging process?
What if we cared so much about education we made the most of every moment?
What if research in space made life better on Earth?
We're helping to build Space Station Freedom, the next step in space exploration, and a new way to look at the home planet.
Why are these people smiling? They've got new Polidin for partials with the power to clean the pearly part and the metal part. And the best part, it only takes 5 minutes. So get new Polidin for partials, unless you're already too good looking as it is.
I try to ignore my sensitive teeth, but they hurt.
Don't ignore your sensitive teeth. Sensodyne helps stop the pain that can make you stop brushing. Could lead even to tooth loss.
Thanks, Sensodyne.
Sensodyne helps stop the pain and the domino effect.
The fox and the grapes. There are rewards to be had, yet they are not always within easy reach of investors. With Merrill Lynch mutual funds, the potential need not elude you. We search high and low for opportunities, but let us remind you, sometimes to reap rewards, you have to wait till they're fully ripe. The moral is, patience is a sound investment principle as well as a virtue.
Maybe I'm naive, but I've been surprised to discover since you announced for president, there are a lot of people out there in the country, including some intelligent people, including some quite moderate, reasonable people, who really despise you, not necessarily personally, but feel you're an evil influence in the American political system. Does that surprise you, and does that bother you? And how do you explain it?
No and no.
No, I mean, look, the White House.
Look, let me tell you something. There are a lot of special interest groups whose agendas I oppose publicly and vociferously. Among them, let's take one, the gay rights movement. And I catch living hell for that, and I'm called a homophobe. Does that bother me? Of course not.
And Pat, let me ask you about a guy the American people seem to like right now, and that's Ross Perot, who there's this hysteria over Ross Perot running for president, the Texas businessman. What do you make of it?
I think he's getting a lot of support now based on the fact that the Democrats don't want Clinton, a lot of Republicans don't want Bush, the American people want change, and here's a name that's been thrown out that hasn't been well defined, and so they're moving toward it. When Mr. Perot defines himself, I think you're liable to see his support diminish.
Isn't that exactly what's happened to you? When you were running early on, you got a lot of votes for people who were basically anti the status quo, anti-Bush. As you defined yourself, your vote total has gone down.
Well, no. The thing is, Michael, I created the protest vote in the Republican Party. There were no protest votes in Iowa. They came, all of them, after New Hampshire. There's no doubt about it. When Republicans think the race is over, they move toward voting for the president. But in California, we're going to point out that Mr. Bush wants a new world order, and we're for America first. We're going to phase out foreign aid if I ever got into power. And these themes are winning votes out here everywhere we go. We went into Minnesota at about 12 or 13%. Spent 2 days and came out with 25. We have gone up in every single state where I've been able to campaign, and we'll do better than 9% in Pennsylvania.
Pat, I'm sure you will. Pat, I know you say you're not running now with 1996 in mind, but don't you think by staying in the whole race through California and having challenged a sitting president, unpopular with some Republicans in the first place, that you will put yourself in a strong position for 1996, stronger than, say, Jack Kemp, Phil Graham, Bill Bennett, and a number of others?
Look, Fred, if I had been at the floor wipe, if I'd been clobbered in New Hampshire, nobody would have been talking about Pat Buchanan for 1996. This wasn't about 96. I got in too late to get on the ballot in South Dakota. This is all about 1992 and where America's gone the next 4 years, and that's the only reason I'm staying in here right through California. That and the fact I made a commitment to the folks in California when I was down there in Georgia.
Well, then what are your plans after California?
I don't have any plans. I don't have any plans for the convention right now. I don't know if I'm going to be knocking on the door and have little Richie Bond open it for me at that convention, or whether I'm going to speak there. I don't have any plans for the fall. My plans are to run as hard as I can through Indiana, North Carolina, New Jersey, California, and then we'll see.
I have to ask you, Pat, because many people ask me, do your possible plans include coming back to Crossfire?
Well, we really haven't thought that far ahead, I'll be honest. What I'm going to do after this thing is over, I really don't know, Michael.
All right, well, on that uplifting note of uncertainty, unusual uncertainty from Pat Buchanan, thanks a lot, Pat.
Thank
Fred
you.
and I will tell you what's going to happen to Pat Buchanan in just a moment.
One measure of quality in a car is how quiet it is, and you might be surprised to find out who builds the car that's the quietest. Holographic imaging actually lets one company see the smallest noise and get rid of it. is just one of the many ways we're using technology to engineer quality at Ford Motor Company.
Our quality is paying off. From the Ford Escort to the quietest car you can buy, the Lincoln Town Car.
Ford Motor Company. Quality is job one. It's working.
Meet best-selling author and successful entrepreneur Philip B. Crosby. He has helped thousands of aspiring executives overcome obstacles in their career paths. Now he can help you, too.
I have been concerned about the bright, ambitious men and women who feel frustrated and blocked as they strive to become executives. That's why I created To Be an Executive by Choice. The series consists of 12 sessions on 4 videotapes. I discuss with you in a personal one-on-one format the real-life things you need to know in order to break away from the pack. Now you can create your own chance to become an executive.
To advance your career, call now for more information.
You are the one who determines your future by the decisions and actions you take. Remember, your future starts today.
When you order To Be an Executive by Choice, you'll also receive a free companion set of audio tapes. Call for your information package today. 1-800-223-EXEC.
For a transcript, send $4 to Crossfire Transcripts, Journal Graphics Incorporated, 1535 Grant Street, Denver, Colorado, 80203, or call 303-831-9000.
You know, Pat's right about one thing, Mike, and that is that he has made George Bush a better candidate. If Pat had gotten 10% in New Hampshire and not had a credible campaign against Bush, the Bush campaign would be purposeless and smug and drifting. Instead, now Bush is beginning to get his act together.
Well, I will concede that Pat has not done as much damage to George Bush as I had hoped, but I think that's only because he hasn't done as well against George Bush as he had hoped. If he had done better, Bush would have been forced to pander a bit more to the right and would have done him a lot more damage. But do you really think he has a shot in '96?
Well, I think he has at least a shot of being in the top of the field. He may not be the front runner, but look, Pat has put together a nationwide campaign. He'll have a money base, and he'll have a national organization. A lot of conservatives like him.
He is not like a typical candidate who may have come in second or against an incumbent or put on a respectable show. He is a permanently marginal figure. Not as marginal as you and me, of course, but a marginal figure in American politics. And this was his one shot, I'm afraid.
I think you're underestimating Pat for '96.
Well, I've done that before. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, I'm Fred Barnes. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Crossfire.
Prime News is up next. Let's get a look at the headlines.
Thank you, Michael. The defense says police officers were obeying society's call for protection when they beat suspect Rodney King. Witnesses to his execution describe Robert Alton Harris's final moments. And despite some confusion, consumers appear to be winning the latest airline fare wars. Prime News is next.
Coming up, Prime News, followed by Larry King Live after a word from your local cable system here on CNN.
I don't like to drive. I'd rather take the bus and talk to my friend.
With my busy schedule, the only chance I get to read the paper is on the Metro.
Now it's just a habit I enjoy.
When you figure gas prices, parking, and maintenance on your car, it all adds up.
Drops me off right in front of my office.
I can't drive yet, but I love to shop. Ask my parents to drive. I had better luck winning the lotto.
Come on, hop on the bus with us.
We've got a nifty way to leave your auto.
It's a real shame. Some companies still sell gasoline without engine cleaning additives. They only put them in their high-octane grades. So you have to pay for octane you may not need just to get the additives you do need. More profit for them, but a waste of your money. At Quick Trip,